The moment my phone buzzed on my nightstand, and at 3 in the morning, I knew my life was about to split into two halves: the lie I had been living for 20 years, and the devastating reality that was waiting for me on the other end of the line. It was a text from my family lawyer, David, a man who has been a close friend for decades and doesn't scare easily, but those 4 words, "call me immediately," "urgent," felt like a physical blow to my chest. When I finally got him on the line, his voice was shaking as he told me that my daughter, the light of my life and the person I had sacrificed everything for, hadn't just been lying about her college tuition. She had been systematically dismantling my retirement accounts and funneling that money into a lifestyle that involved things I can barely bring myself to say out loud. But the absolute worst part, the part that made the room spin until I had to sit on the floor, was the revelation of who she was really working with. Was I wrong for what I did next, for setting a trap that would not only cost my daughter her freedom, but would effectively erase her from my life forever? Tell me, if you found out your own flesh and blood was treating you like an ATM while plotting to leave you penniless in your old age, would you have protected her because she's your child, or would you have let the law take its course just like I did? I need to tell you the whole story because the neighbors think I'm a monster, and my ex-wife is calling me heartless, but none of them had to look at the bank statements I saw that night. To understand how we got to that phone call, you have to understand my relationship with Sarah. I've been a single father since she was 7 years old. Her mother, Elena, was a flighty, impulsive woman who decided one day that motherhood didn't fit her aesthetic, and moved across the country to find herself, leaving me with a heartbroken little girl and a mountain of questions I couldn't answer. From that day on, Sarah was my entire world. I worked double shifts as a high-end contractor, taking on the most grueling projects just so she could have the best of everything. I wanted her to feel like she lacked nothing: private schools, horseback riding lessons, the latest gadgets. If Sarah smiled, the cost didn't matter. I thought I was building a bond of steel, but in hindsight, I was just teaching her that my love had a price tag, and she was the one holding the invoice. Sarah grew up to be beautiful, sharp, and incredibly charismatic. She had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the room, a trait that I now realize is a hallmark of a master manipulator. When she graduated high school, she told me she got into an prestigious university in the city to study law. I was so proud I nearly cried. The tuition was staggering, $40,000 a semester. But I didn't hesitate. I told her I'd handle it, even if it meant dipping into the accounts I had set aside for my later years. For 3 years, she sent me photos of her studying, in the library, her grades, which looked impeccable, and stories about her internships at top firms. I believed every word. I thought my daughter was becoming the success I always dreamed of. But about 6 months ago, things started to feel off. It started with small requests: an extra $5,000 for a specialized bar exam prep course, then another $10,000 for a required study abroad seminar in Europe that she claimed was mandatory for her degree. Every time I asked for a receipt or an official letter from the school, she'd get incredibly emotional, accusing me of not trusting her or reminding me of how her mother abandoned her. That was her ultimate weapon, the abandonment. She knew that as long as she played the damaged child card, I would do anything to prove I was the good parent. I started noticing that my personal accounts were dipping faster than the tuition payments should have allowed. I'm a busy man, and I've always trusted David, my lawyer and business manager, to handle the heavy lifting. But David is thorough. He called me one afternoon to ask why I was making large wire transfers to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. I told him I wasn't. That was the first crack in the dam. I asked Sarah about it, and she laughed it off, saying it must be a banking error or a glitch in the system. She was so convincing that I actually felt guilty for asking. She hugged me and told me she loved me, and for a few weeks, I let it go. But David didn't. He started digging into the university records using his connections in the legal world, and that brings us to the night of the phone call. David told me that Sarah hadn't been enrolled in that university for over 2 years. She had been kicked out in her second semester for academic dishonesty and forging documents. The grades she sent me were Photoshop jobs. The tuition I was paying was actually going into a private account she shared with. And this is the part that killed me. Her mother, Elena. It turns out Elena had come back into Sarah's life years ago, not to be a mother, but to be a partner in crime. Elena had been coaching Sarah on how to bleed me dry, using the money to fund a lavish lifestyle of travel, designer clothes, and even a luxury condo they had rented together in the city under an assumed name. They were laughing at me. Every time I worked a 16-hour day to make sure Sarah's law school bills were paid, they were sitting on a balcony sipping expensive wine, mocking the man who was stupid enough to keep paying for his own betrayal. So that's the situation I was in. I was standing in my kitchen at 4 a.m., clutching a stack of digital evidence that proved my daughter was a fraud and my ex-wife was a parasite. I had lost over $300,000, but more than that, I had lost the only person I truly loved. I had to decide, do I confront her and let her cry her way out of it again, or do I use the very law she pretended to study to take her down? Before I tell you about the trap I set, and the moment the police walked into her graduation party, I want you to pause and comment below. If you found out your child was stealing your life savings and sharing it with the parent who abandoned them, would you call the cops, or would you just cut them off and walk away? Is there such a thing as too far? When it comes to teaching your child a lesson, I'm reading the comments because I still wake up wondering if I destroyed her life or if she destroyed mine first. I decided to play the game. I told David to keep quiet and not to freeze the accounts just yet. I called Sarah the next morning and, with a voice that I forced to be steady, I told her I wanted to throw her a massive early graduation party. Since she was finishing her last semester, I invited everyone, our family, her few remaining friends from high school, and even some of my business associates. I told her I had a special surprise for her, a final gift to celebrate her becoming a lawyer. Sarah was ecstatic. She probably thought I was going to give her a car or another massive check. I spent 3 weeks planning it, every detail a part of the sting. I hired a professional photographer, but I also hired a private investigator to document the people who showed up. And sure enough, Elena showed up too, wearing a dress that probably cost as much as my first truck, paid for with my money. The party was held at a high-end ballroom. Sarah was glowing, playing the part of the successful graduate to perfection. She was walking around, bragging about the firm she was going to join. I waited until the middle of the dinner, when everyone was seated, and I stood up to give my speech. I looked at Sarah, then at Elena, and I saw them wink at each other. They thought they had won. I started by talking about sacrifice. I talked about how much I loved Sarah, and how I had worked every day of my life to ensure she had a future. People were tearing up. Then, I pulled out a remote and turned on the large projector screen behind me. Instead of a slideshow of childhood photos, it was a display of the wire transfer records, the forged grade reports from the university, and a video of Sarah and Elena entering their secret luxury condo with shopping bags from Gucci and Prada. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Sarah's face didn't just go pale, it went gray. She tried to stand up, to scream, to say it was a mistake, but I didn't stop. I scrolled to the final slide, a copy of the police report David and I had filed that morning for grand larceny and identity theft. I looked at my daughter and said, "You wanted to be a lawyer, Sarah. I thought it was only fair you got an up-close look at how the justice system works." Just then, the doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and 4 officers walked in. I had timed it perfectly with the local precinct. Elena tried to run for the side exit, but they caught her before she reached the door. Sarah was hysterical, sobbing the same, "I'm sorry, Daddy," lines she'd used since she was a toddler, but the mask was broken. I didn't look away. I watched them put my daughter in handcuffs. I watched them take the woman I once loved away in a patrol car. The aftermath was a scorched earth reality. Sarah was eventually sentenced to 4 years in prison for her role in the fraud, as she was the one who forged my signatures and accessed the accounts. Elena got 7 years because of her prior record and the fact that she was the one who set up the shell companies. I sold my house, the one Sarah grew up in, because every corner of it felt haunted by her lies. I moved to a small cabin 3 states away where nobody knows my name or my story. I haven't spoken to Sarah since the day of her sentencing. She sends letters, mostly filled with blame, saying that I trapped her and that a real father would have settled it privately. My son-in-law, if she ever had one, or any future grandkids, are a dream that died that night in the ballroom. My bank accounts are slowly recovering, but the trust I had in people is gone forever. I spend my days working on small woodworking projects, and sometimes I just sit on the porch and wonder if there was a way to save her without destroying her. But then I remember the smirk she gave her mother at that table, and I know I did the only thing I could do. The moral of this story is that sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who know exactly where to twist the knife. Being a parent doesn't mean being a doormat, and blood doesn't give anyone a license to ruin your life. I lost my daughter, but I found my self-respect, even if the price was higher than I ever thought I'd pay. Like this video if you think I was right to expose her in front of everyone, or if you think a father should have handled it with more mercy. Subscribe for more stories about deep betrayals and the consequences of living a lie. And please, share your final thoughts in the comments. Would you ever be able to forgive your child for this? Or is some ground just too poisoned to ever grow anything again? I'll see you all in the next story.